Have you ever looked at your child and without saying a word felt that they were living through everything you most feared for them? Maybe you've worked tirelessly to give them a better life than the one you had to offer them, the opportunities you were denied, to shield them from the pain that once shaped your own path. And yet something inside whispers, they're walking the same road I did. This quiet, intimate feeling is far more common than you might think, and it's not about failure or blame. It speaks to something deeper, the workings of our unconscious mind. Freud, the father of psychoanalysis, believed that what we fail to process internally doesn't simply vanish. It shows up elsewhere. It moves. It repeats itself. It gets passed on. Not through anything mystical or magical, but through gestures, reactions, emotional patterns, and silences. A daughter might end up inheriting what her mother avoided. She might live out what her mother tried to forget. She may carry within her the unmet longings and unspoken grief of the woman who gave her life. This isn't about pointing fingers. This message is not an indictment of mothers. It's an invitation to understand. It's a chance to look gently at what binds and divides mothers and daughters, the love, the pain, the expectations, the shared history. That daughter who seems distant, rebellious, or completely different may just be trying to carve out her own identity. Or perhaps, more surprisingly, she's caught in a hidden loyalty to her mother. Because emotional loyalty between mothers and daughters isn't always easy to spot. Sometimes it looks like imitation. Other times, it takes the form of distance. In both cases, it's a bond doing everything it can to stay alive, even in the most difficult ways. Freud believed that the unconscious exists outside of time. We unconsciously repeat what hasn't been resolved, especially within the family. That's why so many mothers are stunned to see their daughters struggling with issues that seem eerily familiar, even though they grew up under different circumstances. It's as if the past refuses to let go, finding ways to live on through new faces, new stories, new times. But here's the good news: change is possible. With awareness, cycles can be broken. With love, pain can be renamed. With open-hearted listening, new stories can be written, stories where mothers and daughters are no longer trapped in the shadows of what came before. In this journey, we'll look closely at the unconscious threads often woven into mother-daughter dynamics. We'll talk about identification, repetition, guilt, projection, inherited trauma, and the powerful freedom that comes from mutual liberation. All of this through the lens of psychoanalysis, but always with one essential reminder: to view every woman's story with compassion, not judgment. If at any point you see yourself reflected in these words, remember, it doesn't mean you did something wrong. It means you're human. And like every human being, you have the right and the strength to reshape your story with those you love most. What couldn't happen then might just be possible now. And when a mother chooses to understand, she doesn't just change her daughter's life, she changes her own. That alone is a new beginning. From the very first months of life, the mother becomes a child's first emotional mirror. For Freud, it is through the mother that the child enters the realm of emotion, language, and being. Her gaze, the tone of her voice, her gestures, all of these are absorbed by the child as foundational truths. In the early stages, this identification is vital. It helps build the child's personality, sense of self, and confidence. A young girl begins to understand what it means to be a woman, what it feels like to be loved, to be welcomed, to be accepted through the way she's received and the way she sees her mother move through the world. But over time, that identification can become a maze. What once served as a bridge of connection quietly turns into a psychological cage. The daughter stops living as her own person and starts reacting as a reflection not out of weakness, but out of love. A silent, unspoken love. It's not unusual to hear a mother say, "She's just like me." Those words often carry affection and pride. But sometimes that likeness also carries the weight of pain the mother never processed. Fears of being unwanted, the feeling of not being enough, the deep weariness of giving endlessly and receiving little in return. Without even realizing it, the daughter absorbs this pain as her own. She starts living out experiences she never consciously chose, but does so with emotional loyalty. Freud spent much of his work exploring the concept of identification. He understood that as the self takes shape, we naturally internalize parts of those around us in order to build our identity. This is part of how we grow, But when the mother holds too much psychic space, either because there's no third figure like a father to help structure that space, or because the emotional bond is overwhelmingly close, the daughter loses her own boundaries. She stops becoming herself and starts becoming an extension of her mother. And that's where her identity begins to fade. She might end up choosing partners just like the ones her mother once had, even if they bring her suffering. She may follow a career path she never wanted simply because it was her mother's unfulfilled dream. She might turn away from her own desires, feeling that embracing them would somehow be a betrayal. None of this happens with conscious intent. No one says I'm going to erase myself to please my mom. It happens quietly in the unconscious, where our earliest emotions live. And mothers don't do this out of cruelty. Most of the time, they have no idea it's happening. They simply want to give their daughters what they themselves never had. But when that giving is tangled with unresolved pain, the daughter's body becomes a vessel for a story the mother never got to finish. She becomes a mirror, but not a mirror that reflects joy. A mirror that reflects old wounds. And that can be incredibly disorienting. Because on the outside, the daughter might seem content. She may have achieved success, a family, a life that looks stable. But inside, something feels off. A persistent sense of not being enough. A sadness she can't name. A tiredness that doesn't come from today, it comes from generations past. What makes this dynamic so hard to break is the guilt. The daughter often feels that pulling away from this reflection means turning her back on her mother. And the mother, seeing her daughter carve out her own path, may feel abandoned. That's why psychoanalysis suggests a process called symbolization. It's the act of naming what's been lived, of allowing both mother and daughter to see each other, not just as reflections, but as two separate women, each with her own story, her own dreams, her own boundaries. When this shift takes place, something powerful happens. The daughter stops being just a mirror. She becomes a full person, and the mother for the first time sees her daughter not as an extension of herself, but as someone real and distinct. This transition is painful, but it is also freeing. It's when love breaks out of repetition and moves into recognition, when both can exist without fearing the loss of the other, when the story no longer needs to be a reflection, but can become a bridge. A daughter who allows herself to be different isn't rejecting her mother. She's honoring her own life. And a mother who embraces this gives her daughter the most precious gift she can permission to live authentically. That is the love that heals, the love that liberates. If these kinds of reflections speak to you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next video. Have you ever told yourself, I don't want my daughter to go through what I went through? And yet somehow you see her facing the same struggles, making similar choices, carrying the same emotional weight. In Freudian psychoanalysis, that's not coincidence. Freud called it repetition compulsion. He observed that people tend to reenact patterns, even painful ones, not out of ignorance or self-harm, but because the unconscious is still trying to resolve something left unfinished in the past. This kind of repetition acts like a psychic echo. What was unresolved in the mother finds new expression in the daughter, not because the daughter wants it, but because the emotional bond between them carries a hidden legacy, something deep, something unspoken passed down from one generation to the next. When we talk about repetition, we're not just referring to exact behaviors playing out again. Sometimes it shows up in symbolic ways. A daughter might find herself in relationships where she feels overlooked or unappreciated, just like her mother felt in her marriage. Or she may live with a constant need to prove her worth, mirroring how her mother once had to fight for acknowledgement throughout her life. Often this cycle repeats so subtly that it only becomes noticeable with time. Without realizing it, the daughter starts reacting to the world with the same rigidity, the same fears, the same emotional defenses she observed in her mother, even though she may consciously long for something very different. Freud taught that the unconscious isn't aware of chronological time. It doesn't separate what happened decades ago from what still lingers in emotional memory. That's why what's been repressed tends to resurface, and more often than not, it returns disguised as personal choice. But these choices aren't entirely free. They're shaped by unspoken expectations, hidden loyalties, and pain that's been handed down. The daughter may believe she's making her own decisions when in truth, she's trying without realizing it to heal complete or save her mother's story. This is one of the most difficult aspects of motherhood, recognizing that your own unresolved experiences can unconsciously find their way into your daughter's life, not through blame, but through the structure of the psyche. That's why repetition isn't a punishment. It's a message. It's the unconscious trying to call attention to something that needs to be seen, understood, and given meaning. Until that happens, the past continues to live on inside the daughter as though it's still unfolding in the present. Many mothers find themselves asking, "Where did I go wrong?" But that may not be the question that leads to real healing. A more powerful question might be, which part of my story is my daughter trying to carry, even if she doesn't realize it? That kind of question opens the door to deep listening. Listening to your own past, looking closely at the choices you've made, and acknowledging what has gone unspoken. This inward movement within the mother has a profound effect on the daughter, even if it's never spoken out loud. Psychoanalysis doesn't rely on change through sheer willpower. It's about inner processing. When a mother begins to reinterpret what she's been through, that emotional content no longer weighs on her daughter or urges her to repeat it. Emotional freedom begins right there when repetition turns into understanding. And the most touching part is that when the daughter stops reenacting her mother's story, it isn't a form of rejection. It's actually a deep act of love. It's as if she's saying, "I see you. I recognize your pain, but I need to live my own life." And the mother, by allowing this symbolic distance, offers her daughter something extraordinary, the chance to exist fully on her own terms, to make her own choices, set her own boundaries, and follow her own desires. This doesn't weaken the bond. On the contrary, it strengthens it. Because real love doesn't demand sameness. It welcomes difference. It embraces uniqueness. And it's in that acceptance that both mother and daughter become free to love without guilt, without weight, without mirroring each other's wounds. Repetition only holds power while it remains hidden. Once it's named, it loses its grip. What once felt like fate becomes the gateway to a different kind of life. The mother-daughter bond never unfolds in a vacuum. It's always influenced by other figures, especially the father. Even when he's absent, the father's presence is felt in the silence, in the void, in the words that were never spoken. Freud spent much of his work exploring the Oedipus complex, a key moment in a child's development when they must come to terms with love, rivalry, separation, and desire. For girls, this phase doesn't just shape their connection with their father, it redefines how they relate to their mother as well. When this symbolic triangle becomes unstable, it can lead to a fused or unresolved rivalry between mother and daughter. The emotional or physical absence of the father often intensifies this dynamic, making it heavy, suffocating, and hard to shift. Without a third figure to help structure this psychic space, mother and daughter can become entangled, locked together without room for individuality. The daughter might feel a need to protect her mother from loneliness, abandonment, or sadness, the kind she's witnessed over the years. Even as a child, she might take on a role that doesn't belong to her, becoming her mother's emotional companion. It's not uncommon for such a daughter to grow up feeling responsible for her mother's emotional well-being. Guilt often shadows her steps, guilt for wanting distance, for choosing a different path, for craving freedom. Every move toward independence feels like a threat to her mother's emotional balance, making it hard for her to step into her own life. Freud taught that the father's role goes far beyond the biological or social. It's symbolic. It embodies law boundaries separation. It enables the daughter to distinguish herself from her mother, to sever that invisible umbilical cord and to become her own person, her own. Without that symbolic function, the daughter stays fused with the mother's image, unable to fully say, "I am." And the absence of that paternal role can show up in different ways. Sometimes it's a father who simply isn't there. Other times he's physically present, but emotionally absent, uninvolved, unresponsive, detached. In these cases, his silence is heavy. His withdrawal deepens the fusion between mother and daughter because there's no one stepping in to create symbolic space between them. There are also situations where the father is indeed present, yet fuels rivalry. He may excessively praise the daughter, belittle the mother, tip the scales in a way that distorts the balance of roles and undermines the mother's authority. This kind of dynamic leaves the daughter confused, torn between love and competition, unsure whether to follow her mother or rebel against her. These patterns leave marks that don't fade with time. Many women, once they begin to reflect on their relationships, realize they're still tangled in behaviors rooted in that original family triangle. Some avoid intimacy out of fear that closeness will mean emotional betrayal of their mothers. Others struggle deeply when becoming mothers themselves, repeating the very entanglement they once knew so well. It's worth noting that this triangle doesn't have to be perfect to serve its purpose. No family is flawless. But when symbolic roles are at least somewhat intact, when the daughter can see herself as separate from her mother, and the father is recognized as a mediating figure, emotional growth flows more naturally. The hopeful truth is that even if this triangle broke down in the past, its meaning can be reshaped. Awareness opens the door to transformation. The daughter may come to see she's not responsible for carrying her mother's pain, and the mother in turn may realize that real love isn't about control, it's about trust. Once we can see this invisible triangle, we open the way for more balanced, healthier bonds. It's not about erasing the past, but redefining it, breaking the cycle of old roles and beginning to write new ways of being, of loving, of living. When a mother and daughter finally understand that there is space between them, and that space isn't abandonment, but freedom, the relationship starts to shift. What was once fusion tension or confusion can finally become mutual respect, maturity, and emotional clarity. Few human experiences are as marked by ambivalence as motherhood. There's deep love, but also exhaustion. There's devotion, but also resentment. And between these emotional extremes, many mothers carry a silent burden guilt. Freud saw guilt as a central force in the psyche. In his view, the superego, or moral conscience, is built from internalizing parental figures. When a mother for any reason feels she has let her daughter down, that guilt settles into her inner world like a quiet but lasting judgment. This guilt rarely finds a voice. Instead, it shows up in subtle ways, in overprotectiveness, in an urge to control, in difficulty, allowing the daughter to make mistakes, choose her path, or grow apart. Beneath this overbearing vigilance is an unconscious attempt to make up for what was lacking, and often to shield the daughter from the pain the mother once endured herself. But even though this kind of protection may come from a loving place, it can end up smothering the very growth it seeks to protect. The daughter begins to feel like her emotional freedom is being restrained. Her choices seem constantly scrutinized, and she senses that asserting her independence somehow threatens the love her mother offers. It's during this tension that silence creeps in, a silence thick with unspoken meaning. The mother doesn't speak about her guilt, and the daughter doesn't know how to ask for space without causing pain. They love each other deeply, yet struggle to truly hear one another, and the bond that should bring closeness starts to feel like distance. Many mothers, especially those raised in environments where emotions weren't openly expressed, believe silence is a way to protect. They think hiding their pain helps preserve their daughter's well-being. But psychoanalysis teaches us that what remains unspoken often surfaces in other ways, in tone, in body language, in lingering glances. The daughter picks up on these cues, and though she can't name the weight she feels, she carries it as if it were her own. She starts taking on responsibilities that don't belong to her. She tries to be flawless, to meet every expectation, to avoid mistakes. In doing so, she continues a pattern where love becomes duty and connection starts to feel like obligation. Freud pointed out that wherever repression exists, symptoms appear. And one of the most common symptoms in this kind of relationship is the daughter's struggle to feel free. Free to disagree, to choose her own path, to stand apart without fearing disappointment. A mother's desire to do right by her child is genuine. But it must be matched by the ability to listen, to be flexible, and to accept human limitations. No mother is perfect, and no daughter needs her to be. What a daughter truly needs is someone real, someone who brings her presence, not perfection, someone who can show both triumphs and regrets, who shares the journey of learning. When a mother can say, "I did my best, but I made mistakes too," she doesn't lose respect. She gains it. She reveals to her daughter that it's okay to be imperfect, that it's still possible to be loved, even with flaws. And when the daughter realizes this, something inside her softens. She understands that she doesn't have to live up to some idealized image. She can be who she truly is, with doubts and fears and imperfections, and that doesn't create distance between them. It brings them closer in a more honest and mature way. Turning guilt into love begins with words. It starts with sincere conversation, with a willingness to explore the past, not to judge, but to understand. A mother who tries to understand her own story not only frees herself from guilt, but offers her daughter a chance at a fresh beginning. She shows her that life doesn't have to be bound by rigid rules, that change and growth are possible. And when a daughter feels heard, she starts to believe in herself, in the relationship, and in the hope of creating healthier connections for the future. Where guilt once lived, emotional responsibility begins to take root. Where silence once stood, listening emerges. And in the effort to do right, the mother discovers something even greater, the power to truly love, not by demanding absolute agreement, but by receiving her daughter as she is, differences and all. There are hurts that have never been named, never spoken out loud, yet they live on. Quiet and enduring, they pass from one generation to the next like an invisible thread. And often those who carry this pain have no idea where it comes from. Freud was among the first to suggest that the unconscious doesn't just store the repressed parts of an individual's life, but also carries traces of family, cultural, and social experiences that helped shape us. He hadn't coined the term intergenerational transmission yet, but his work opened the door to the idea that a parent's past, especially a mother's, becomes part of a child's inner world in profound and lasting ways. A daughter doesn't need to hear every detail of her mother's past for it to live through her. No one has to say, "This happened to me." A child's unconscious gathers everything that hasn't been emotionally processed and carries it as their own. A mother raised in an emotionally deprived environment may have learned not to rely on others. She may have developed a strong sense of self-reliance, emotional toughness, and the need to stay in control. Without ever saying it aloud, she passes this protective stance down to her daughter, through her example, through her guarded emotions, and through the struggle she has in showing vulnerability. The daughter in turn learns to guard herself against the world. She grows up not trusting easily, resisting surrender, often feeling a deep sadness she can't explain. She finds it hard to build true emotional closeness, and she carries a fear of failure that seems to come from nowhere. But those feelings, though they live inside her, often belong to someone else. They may come from her mother or her grandmother, or even from women further back in her lineage, women whose emotional wounds left invisible imprints still echoing today. Freud said that what isn't remembered will keep returning. This return might show up as emotional blocks, symptoms, or painful patterns repeating again and again. When a mother hasn't worked through her own story, her daughter may end up feeling in her body and her choices what was never resolved in her mother's unconscious. This isn't about blame. The mother doesn't choose to pass this down. More often than not, she herself was caught in a cycle that began before she was even born. Every woman carries not just her personal story, but also the emotional history of all the women who came before her. That's why in many families we see the same patterns playing out like clockwork. Women marrying too young, giving up their dreams, staying in harmful relationships, raising children alone, blaming themselves for everything, as though following some invisible script that has been handed down generation after generation. These scripts aren't curses. They are silent calls for acknowledgement. The family's unconscious through each new generation is searching for someone who can put a name to the pain, someone who can give shape to what's been trapped. That person is often the daughter. She senses something is off. Life feels too heavy. There's a sadness she can't name. And when she starts digging into her feelings, she realizes that some of what she's carrying doesn't belong to her. It's inherited. And it can only be healed once it's brought into the light. This moment of recognition is what Freud called working through. When we name what used to be just a vague emotion, we begin to transform it. The pain loses its grip. It gains shape, meaning, and context, and that opens the door to change. A mother who comes to terms with her own wounds prevents them from becoming her daughter's burden. And the daughter, once she understands what's really happening, is freed from guilt. She sees that not every ache in her heart is hers to carry. Some pains need only to be seen, understood, and returned to their rightful place. When this shift takes place, something new begins within the family. What was once a cycle of repetition turns into awareness. What once felt like a weight becomes a legacy of women who have finally chosen to stop suffering in silence. Because love alone is not enough. Healing matters too. And healing begins the moment a woman decides the past will no longer write the future, not for herself and not for her daughter. Every mother wants the best for her daughter. That wish runs deep. It's honest, heartfelt, and often unconditional. But there's a fine line where love can turn into something else when it crosses into control and becomes projection. This is where many mother-daughter relationships start to fray, even though no one can quite explain why. Freud noticed that parents, especially mothers, tend to project their unmet dreams onto their children. He called this phenomenon secondary narcissism. The concept is simple, yet profound. The child becomes a symbolic chance to fulfill what couldn't happen in the parent's own life. The child becomes the vessel carrying all the broken dreams. This usually isn't done with bad intentions. Quite the opposite. The words most often used are, "I just want her to be happy," though what's often left unspoken is, "I just want her to be happy," in the way I believe happiness should look. When a mother places her unfulfilled hopes onto her daughter, she creates an invisible path, one that's often narrow and difficult to navigate. Eager for approval, the daughter tries to follow that path. She chooses the career her mother might have chosen for herself. She adopts behaviors that bring her mother comfort. She avoids situations that might challenge her mother's ideals. But over time, this silent agreement begins to take a toll. The daughter starts to feel that the life she's living doesn't quite belong to her. There's a quiet emptiness she can't explain. A persistent restlessness lingers, as though something important is always just out of reach. No matter what she does, it never seems to be enough. That feeling often shows up when love has been confused with expectations. Instead of feeling free to be herself, the daughter believes she must measure up to an image. Spontaneity fades, replaced by a sense of duty, not because she wants to, but because she feels she must. Loyalty takes the place of personal desire. The mother, for her part, might not even realize the effect of her projections. She may see her daughter's distance as rebellion or even ingratitude. When her daughter chooses a different life path, a new kind of job, a different lifestyle, an unexpected partner, the mother may feel personally rejected. And that kind of pain runs deep. Not because her daughter did anything wrong, but because without knowing it, she has let go of an ideal. And letting go of an ideal is always painful. Freud spoke of the ego's deep resistance to losing an idealized image. When that image has been cast onto someone else like a daughter, the emotional break can be tangled in resentment, sorrow, and inner turmoil. Still, this break is necessary, not as a form of rebellion, but as part of growing up. For a daughter to fully become herself, she must be allowed to disappoint expectations. She needs the freedom to say no without fearing she'll lose her mother's love. And when the mother begins to understand what's really happening, she can turn that sting of frustration into a moment of acceptance. She comes to see that love isn't about guiding every step, but about making room. It's not about seeing her own dreams reflected, but about allowing space for a life she didn't plan. It's not about shaping who her daughter becomes, but about watching openly and curiously as she grows into someone new, even if that person is nothing like she imagined. This transition isn't easy. It asks for awareness, humility, and the ability to truly listen. But when it happens, the bond between them deepens. The daughter no longer feels the pressure to perform a role, and the mother discovers a new way to love, lighter, more real, more human. There's a beautiful moment in a mother's life when she looks at her daughter and finally sees her not as an echo, not as an extension, but as another woman. In that moment, a different kind of love begins to bloom. A love that respects, that lets go, that doesn't rely on control to stay present. When love stops being a projection, it becomes trust. And that trust is what allows mothers and daughters to walk side by side, no longer bound by obligation, but connected by freedom, affection, and a deep mutual respect. At the end of the day, perhaps the most beautiful way to say I love you is to let someone be whole, even if their wholeness looks nothing like yours. The bond between mother and daughter runs deep, often built on years of love, sacrifice, devotion, and close connection. So it's only natural that the instinct to protect, guide, and stay involved in a daughter's life remains strong even after she becomes an adult. Still, there comes a pivotal point in this relationship when the mother must allow her daughter to become her own person, even if that means letting go of the image she once dreamed of. Freud taught that emotional maturity always involves symbolic loss. To grow, we must give up the illusion of completeness, accept life's limits, and embrace differences. This isn't just true for the daughter, it's equally, if not more true, for the mother. Allowing your daughter to forge her own path, to make choices that diverge from your values, is an act of surrender and of deep, evolved love. It's not about giving up on her. It's about recognizing that she isn't a continuation of you. She has her own past, her own desires, fears, and journey that belongs solely to her. Many mothers experience a sense of absence when their daughters become independent. When she marries, moves away, starts her own family, and makes choices you might not agree with, a quiet gap can appear. The warmth of daily closeness is replaced by silence that can feel cold, and the distance may seem ungrateful. But what's really happening is a natural shift in life's rhythm. From Freud's perspective, it's precisely this separation that makes genuine love possible. As long as there's fusion, there's confusion of roles, expectations, and emotional projections. Only when mother and daughter stand apart can they truly see each other. It's in this space between them, this breathing room, that respect is born. When a mother tries to remain the center of her adult daughter's world, it's often rooted in fear, insecurity, or loneliness. But ironically, this clinging usually drives a wedge between them. The daughter senses her autonomy is threatened and pulls away not out of selfishness, but from a vital need to protect her sense of self. She needs the freedom to make mistakes, to fail, to explore, to change her mind. She needs to choose freely, even if her choices don't make sense to others. A mother who understands this isn't staying silent. She's choosing wisdom. She trusts that everything she's ever taught her daughter is still alive within her, even if the steps she takes look different. True love doesn't feel insulted by difference. It welcomes it. And in that welcome, a new way of being together emerges, one that's lighter, more mature, built more on listening than on advice. Many mothers fear that if they let go of control, they'll lose their daughter's love. But the truth is often the opposite. A daughter who feels free to be herself returns out of love, not duty. She turns to her mother for support, not surveillance. She shares her life not to meet expectations, but because she wants to. This new relationship no longer rests on hierarchy, but on mutual trust. It's not about directing, it's about walking beside each other. It's about seeing one another as two women, each with her own life story. And those differences don't have to lead to conflict. Letting her daughter be herself often requires a mother to face her own inner fears. The fear of being alone, of being forgotten, of no longer being needed. But once those fears are spoken aloud, once they're seen for what they are, and stop being projected outward, something shifts inside the daughter. The bond between them softens. It's no longer a tightrope strung between unmet expectations and disappointment. It becomes something solid, a connection that doesn't restrict but supports, one that doesn't demand but welcomes. And as each woman learns to breathe freely in her own space, the relationship grows stronger, not weaker. A mother doesn't lose her place when she lets her daughter go. What she gains is a different kind of presence, quieter, more symbolic, and far more enduring. She becomes a point of reference, a safe harbor, a living memory, and that's worth more than any kind of control. In the end, loving your daughter doesn't mean making sure she turns out just like you, or even like the version you hoped she'd become. Real love is letting her grow into whoever she chooses to be, even when that challenges you, and staying close, not as a guide, but as someone who honors the path she's chosen. That kind of freedom doesn't create distance, it creates closeness. Because only someone who feels truly free to be themselves can love fully and stay because they want to, not because they feel they have to. The relationship between a mother and daughter is without question one of the most intricate and tender bonds in human life. It's woven with memories, unspoken moments, gestures, hopes, and feelings that stretch across years. It can also be the space where the past tries to replay itself quietly, asking to be understood rather than pushed aside. Freud showed us that what we keep buried in the unconscious has a way of coming back as fate, and that fate often arrives in the form of repetition, not just of behaviors, but of old stories, unresolved hurt, worn-out patterns, and abandoned dreams. When a mother and daughter don't realize this is happening, they can become reflections of one another, caught in an invisible chain of unspoken loyalty. But understanding this process isn't about pointing fingers. It's about setting ourselves free. When a mother makes the choice to look at herself, her story, her wounds, she doesn't just change. She breaks the cycle. She protects. She frees. She brings honor to all the women who came before her and all those who will follow. And in the same way, a daughter who begins to recognize these deep emotional ties has the chance to stop being just a reflection. She can become her own person, with her own voice, her own body, her own longings. She can continue to love her mother, not for the ideals she once represented, but for who she truly is. A woman who in her own way also tried to find happiness with the tools she had. There's no perfect script for this kind of journey, no manual that tells us exactly how to do it. But there is a possible meeting point when both mother and daughter choose to stop expecting perfection and instead choose to truly listen. When they understand that real love doesn't come from control, but from trust, and that honoring each other's differences is one of the deepest forms of affection there is. Thank you for walking this journey with me. If you're still here, it means something in your heart resonated maybe with a mother, a daughter, or the echo of your own story. What we've uncovered today isn't just about family. It's about breaking patterns, healing generations, and choosing love over repetition. Freud taught us that what stays unconscious will return as destiny. But once we bring it to light, we reclaim the power to choose differently. And when even one woman chooses awareness, she doesn't just change her own life, she becomes a turning point for those who came before and those yet to come. If this message stirred something in you, share it with someone you love, because sometimes the most powerful healing begins with simply being seen and heard. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay connected. This space is for those ready to love with more freedom and to live with more truth. Until next time, take care of your heart, honor your story, and remember you are the beginning of something new.